Ladies and gentlemen, let's Red Gaming video. We're going to be tackling the PlayStation 4 architecture and Shadow Fall. Guerrilla have been doing recent interviews and they've been pretty blunt in them actually. And they have said that if there's more than 24 enemy AIs on screen, the title starts to get frame rate drops. So, the question is it as bad as really, it seems on first glance? Well, before we start doing some analysis, let's do the sensible thing. Let's read the interview out. I'll do a little bit of analysis as we go through, and then at the end, I'm going to give my thoughts and opinions on how this is all working. So the first thing to note is the engine is still the same, but we had to redo a lot of it. It's a different architecture and had to be rewritten. A lot of the pipeline of production is still the same, but now it's 4 or even 8 times previously, because everything has to be at higher resolution, it has to be more detailed, which means more loading, more texture mapping, and a lot more work and production in that sense. We had to revamp a lot to go next gen. It was a good thing because we just wanted to make it better. I'm going to do a very quick analysis on that. Obviously he's referring to the texture resolution, the polygon count, much more besides. When he's talking about a lot more loading, obviously there's a huge amount of graphical assets in Killzone. Don't believe me? Well, 1.3 gigs, for example, is non-streaming textures. You've also got about 800 megabytes of render targets alone. And indeed, the whole figure of video memory is 3 gigs, plus another 1.5 gigs is the rest of the system. So you're looking at 550 for the sound, and much more besides. I'm not going to go into all of it because there's a hell of a lot of readout. If you're curious, you can check out my PlayStation 4 Killzone Shadow Fall post-mortem video. But suffice to say, it's a hell of a lot more assets than previously. So let's continue. He noted that the biggest and obvious difference would be more memory and more graphical power on screen. For me as a games designer, what I was really interested in was getting more gameplay elements on screen and more enemy types of the same, with more weapon types. Bigger areas, for me, that was giving a lot of ingredients to play around with. Previously, we were limited. You could only have 6 or 7 guys on screen, only 2 types, and it had to be a specific at a specific range. The ability to throw more on screen has allowed the designer to open up a lot more in that respect, I suppose you could say. So, just in case, and out of quote of course, just in case you guys are not exactly certain what he's referring to there, first of all, at specific ranges is obvious. Basically, the closer up you get, the more details you're going to start seeing on those characters. Basically, this is all going to LOD. I really need to finish the LOD videos that I've been doing. I've got lots of gameplay to show you guys as well on how all this works. Suffice to say, however, the basic premise is that the further away you are from an object, as regular viewers will probably be aware, you don't need so much detail because you can't, well, you just literally cannot see it. However, obviously if you're close up but you still have that low LOD, what starts happening is it becomes painfully obvious that the models look kind of crappy. In other words, low resolution textures are utilized, low polygon counts in the models themselves, which means low quality overall. And the reason this is important is because let's say you're fighting 10 guys close up. You're going to be able to see lots and lots and lots and lots of detail on those 10 dudes, but there's also a heavy price to pay in terms of performance. On the other hand, let's say they're further away. Let's say, in games terms they're like 40 meters away or whatever. What starts happening is you can get away with a hell of a lot less polygons and a hell of a lot less detail and textures, lighting, everything else really that kind of goes towards a game. And this rather obviously puts a hell of a lot less work on the GPU and the actual CPU as well, may I add. So what about the only 2 types and so on? Well, he didn't really clarify that 100%. However, I would guess he's basically talking about only 2 types of soldiers simultaneously, and that would basically be a simple equation of it takes less processing power, less memory, for example, to be able to have less objects, less animation sets, less AI subroutines and so on, and squeeze them all into a fairly small amount of memory. And that's not just exclusive for the PS3. I don't really think that either previous generation console was exactly flush with memory. Anyway, so the question is, okay, we know that previous generation it was 6 or possibly 7, depending on what was going on, what distances you were at, that type of thing. So what about the PlayStation 4? Well, he said yes, it's 24 in terms of the upper limit. But that's just enemy AI, and there's a lot of other types of enemy AI. Lots of destructibility, lots of dynamic objects, and there are a lot of... Those are much higher limits, but the amount of AI is around 24. So of course, okay, you want to know what happens if you do an experiment and you squeeze that to 25 or 26. So it's pretty simple. The frame rate drops. He said that all autonomous, they create their own effects. They're busy little bees. You're not just getting 24 Helgens on screen. You're also getting all of their additional effects and interactions. And it's this that means as soon as you stop pushing it over 24, you get performance issues. So, end quote, and let's do a little bit of discussion on this, shall we? Because people are jumping on this as though it's Christmas, and really kind of questioning, well, what's going on? Well, there's multiple things to consider here. And by all means, I am not speaking to developers on this, for A, and for B, even if I were, they're not going to tell me everything, and for C, well, you'll understand when we're going through it. I think that's the best option. First of all of these different AIs can do a hell of a lot more. They're a lot more complicated than the previous generation. It is not a copy and paste. I've seen some people comment on the amount of zombies, for example, on Dead Rising, and said, well, hang on a minute, ignore the graphics of which game's better. I'm not going to get into that argument, but let's go into the AI argument. Why in the balls can you deal with magnitudes of higher zombie count enemies and, well, versus soldiers? The answer to that is pretty simple, actually. I'm not taking anything away from Dead Rising, by the way. I'm not saying, what Microsoft and all the teams are doing, but that game is not impressive. I'm just pointing out that you can't really compare them because they're zombies. The whole purpose of zombies is they're not that intelligent to begin with. I mean, zombies aren't exactly known for, being Einsteins, are they? My point being that their AI routines in comparison are going to be a hell of a lot smaller. Also, there's going to be a lot less diversity because of that. So in other words, if different soldiers using different weapon types, unless that soldier has been trained in probably the worst way possible and imaginable, I would really hope if I was ever fighting alongside a soldier that he would not be using a grenade launcher in the same way that someone else would be using a sniper rifle, and that the sniper rifle user would not be using it in the same way as, a tactical shield and an Uzi, just making it up, of course, on the spot. In other words, all of them need a hell of a lot of diversity in how they do things, especially because a lot of the AI has drones. Now, the frame rate for the single player on Killzone Shadow Fall, as far as I'm aware, is being targeted to 30 is a rock-solid, stable platform at 1080p. To give you an idea of just how expensive, and by expensive I mean in terms of actual utilization of /CPU time, is with the AI, think of it this way. It goes to 60 on multiplayer, as far as I'm aware, so that's a considerable saving. So there's a couple of points that I'd like to also raise in concern for this. The first is that as far as I'm aware right now, the developers are not utilizing GPU compute for the AI. The absence of GPU compute, obviously one of the primary purposes of GPU compute is actually to do things such as physics and AI and everything else that is usually better to offload. Guerrilla are simply not doing that at the moment. I need to do some research actually on how difficult it is to utilize compute for AI. I am not that knowledgeable on that subject. I'm going to be doing some research over it hopefully this weekend. I'm aware that it's based on a lot of C++ and C languages, obviously, but I'm not quite sure how easy it will be to transfer a lot of the current code that they've got onto a GPU computer. I imagine it won't be super difficult, but obviously there's a reason they've not done so. They have said that they're still trying to get used to how a lot of the stuff works. Another point I'd like to make is that, well, so people are already starting to ask, well, what's going on? You know, how, especially since the cell processor in terms of raw performance was a monster, it's actually, technically speaking, probably more powerful in many ways than the AMD Jaguar. The cell was actually probably faster. However, there's a couple of things you have to remember. First of all, the AMD Jaguar is doing only CPU stuff. It's not having to worry about helping with stuff like AA, texture filtering or whatever, which the PS3's cell was doing. Second point you have to remember, it's an in-order processor. I'm talking about the cell. That also reduces the efficiency that AI could be run, especially because obviously sometimes you can't predict what's going to happen, therefore you have issues with compilers, therefore sometimes one of the SPEs or the actual PPE itself, the threads, could literally just be stalled. However, it does kind of tell me that obviously right now the developers are finding that the CPU could be the issue. Now, I'm not saying it is the issue because I don't know exactly all of the... Basically, I don't know how they're running all of their different threads on the system. But it's possible that what Microsoft have been saying, you may remember that in a different video series on the Xbox One's architecture, I was discussing that the Xbox One's architects, Andrew Goosen and Nick Baker, I believe, they were discussing that the 1.6 gigahertz of the Xbox One's CPU actually, the upclock to 1.75 gigahertz actually gave them a significant higher performance increase than what they actually found from increasing the GPU. And the reason they said that was because they found that they were CPU bound. So I do wonder if that's going to be the problem with the PS4. I do wonder, because remember, it's not like the 8 cores of the AMD Jaguar were all available for operating systems. For the games, there are 2 cores which are reserved. 2 cores which are reserved for OS. And so it's possible that the performance of the AMD Jaguar, which is about 100 G-flops of compute performance, is going to suffer just a smidgen from that. I'm not saying it will, but I have a feeling that from the developer's point of view, it's going to definitely be a case of farming stuff out to compute. But I would also like everyone to remember that this stuff is still very early code. In other words, they're not using compute, they're still using basically a PS3 engine that's been heavily modified, and so there's going to be still a lot of optimizations there which are going to be included in the future. And this of course goes for any console. It's like, the first wave of stuff is always the worst. Sure, what say Guerrilla are doing and that type of thing is very impressive graphically and everything else. It's a great first step. But I have a feeling that in 3 years' time, it's going to be nothing compared to what the mid kind of generation titles are going to look like. I mean, you can just see that from all the other previous consoles in history. It's not exactly anything splendid or impressive. Anyway, I think that's just about it for this particular video. Hopefully, you found it somewhat interesting. I'm going to get going, but I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.